Hey guys, I'm so excited to present this interview to you with my brother Connor. He is about 2 years younger than me, and we have a ton of similarities. He's also a CPA. He also loves travel and wants to live a somewhat non-conventional lifestyle. So a year ago, he took off on a journey to do 1 year of international travel through Europe. And so I've done this interview to check in with him and to have him chat about all of the destinations he's been to, what his favorites were. And we also went in depth about the finances behind it. So how he financially prepared for the trip and what his budget is on the road to sustain this type of lifestyle. So I'm so excited to share this with you guys. I hope you love it. Connor and I are considering doing many more types of conversations like this and potentially starting a podcast in the future. So comment below if that's something you'd be interested in hearing more of, and let's dive in. So today we're going to do a deep dive interview to talk about Connor's first year of full-time travel, which, Connor, it's almost been exactly a year, right?
Yeah, so we started on February 1st and it is now November 20th. So yeah, it's coming up on, I guess it'll be 10 months.
Wow. And you haven't been back to the States once since February 1st, right?
I have not, no. And we're going back December 2nd to be with the fam for the holidays. And I think we're both nervous. I think we know that prices have gone up. We know that, the landscape's a bit different since the beginning of the year, but excited to see family, excited to see you, and it should be good.
Can't wait. I'm excited to see you too. And you've got to meet the new baby. So our sister, Nicole, has a now 3-month-old, and he is the chubbiest, most adorable little baby. So I'm excited for you to meet him.
So cute.
Well, we'll get into kind of talking about maybe what that reverse culture shock will feel like, but I have some kind of precursor questions that I think we would all benefit from hearing your answer on. And I'm going to act like I know nothing, although I probably know the answer to all of these.
Yeah.
So just know that. So I want to kind of talk about what spurred your love for travel. How did you get the idea or the wild hair that, oh, wow, maybe I should just take off and do this full year plus of international travel?
So I don't want to give you a big head, but I would say it was probably you who sparked it in me in the first place, I would say. So you started traveling in college, right? Is whenever you did your study abroad, right? That was in college.
In London for 4 months.
Yes. And I feel like that's kind of what planted the seed that it could happen. My sister was doing it, she was obviously having like a wonderful time, and I wanted to kind of explore it myself. Right. So I didn't get to study abroad in college, but I just remember, thinking about you and your travels and thinking of how it was like this magical faraway land. And I specifically really remember really, really vividly Budapest, whenever you spent time in Budapest. And was that during study abroad?
That was actually my first international trip, like as a young professional. Like I was out into the working world in my first year and took like a week of PTO and got a cheap flight deal to Budapest. And that was like, I mean, my study abroad really sparked some love for travel, but that was just like the most affirming trip ever. Because at that time, Budapest was very much, I think, looked at in the eyes of a lot of Americans as like truly Eastern Europe with the super cheap prices and the backpacker culture. So it was kind of eye-opening getting to see that.
Yeah. I feel like that is the view that I had, like whenever you told me you were in Budapest, I imagined like just like a different world. And it's funny because on our trip, we went to Budapest, and I remember being there and think it was like so surreal that I was there in this place that like I had formed this crazy opinion of in my mind, 5 years ago. And now I was able to visit and realize it. So that was super special. So, but anywho, so I would say that you started my love for it. Right. And then, after college, me and Mariana, who is my soon-to-be wife, we decided to move to Boston, and that was sort of because of you also, right? Because you had been there, and that was sort of a mini travel, a mini like make your like be vulnerable and put yourself out there. Like that was a mini version of that, right? Is moving from Texas, which is where we went, where I kind of, lived high school and college, and moving to Boston. So, yeah, so I started my first job in Boston, and I knew I wanted to travel. I specifically remember like sitting at my desk, and like I had taken a screenshot of Google Maps, and I put it in like a Microsoft like Paint, and I was drawing lines of like a route that I wanted to do around Europe. I specifically, and I still have it on my computer,
That's
and I went back to
hilarious.
it. It is, yeah, it's so rudimentary. It's hilarious. But so yeah, I feel like that's kind of like what sparked my love for travel.
That's awesome. And just going back to like your college experience, why didn't you do a study abroad?
I mean, I was already kind of like in debt from college, like
Yeah.
college was expensive, and I had like I was in like an organization, and I actually had created my own organization too. That was like a service organization at Texas Tech, and I felt like I couldn't really like leave that to go study abroad. So it was something that I always felt like I would regret if I didn't do, and I didn't do it. And I'm not going to say like I regretted not doing it, but I felt like the seed was still planted, even though I didn't get to go have my semester in Europe. I feel like the seed, the travel bug that is planted whenever one does do a study abroad, I still fell victim to it.
And I think that's what's important. Like with study abroads, a lot of times you're not going to get that cultural experience at 18, 19
Right.
years old. You're just there
Yeah.
to party and
Party, drink.
drink.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I think that that's totally okay. The seed is the most important piece of it. And so I know
exactly.
when you guys lived in Boston, that's really when you started just like taking some of those local trips. And then also I know you went to Europe for the first time while you guys were there. So tell me about that. And also tell me about why that wasn't necessarily enough, why that didn't completely scratch the itch.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will be kind of like friends in Texas and stuff like that. And you understand kind of like the scale and size of Texas, right? Like in Texas, you can't take a nice little 2 hour trip to, a whole different city with a different downtown and different experiences. In 2 hours in Texas, you get from, one stretch of highway to another stretch of highway, or honestly, you're probably on the same highway. So there's no sort of like, it's tough to do cultural exchanges in Texas, even between cities, because of just the sheer size. So once we got to Boston, we had the ability to do this. And like, in the Northeast, there is immense, like, there's nature, there's a bunch of different cool cities that are easily accessible. So we took advantage of it. Like we would go, we would go to New Hampshire and hike, or we would go to Portland, Maine, which is still one of our favorite cities, where like the food is just out of this world for the amount of people that live there. And there's a ton going on and a ton of breweries. And I don't know, I felt like we just kind of like started to realize that there is a ton of fun in new experiences and new cities, and I feel like that's kind of like what started it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And yeah, and your international trip that you guys took to Italy was during this time
Yes.
also, right?
Yeah, so that was my first time abroad, period,
Canada.
minus like Mexico for a resort, which I'm not counting here. That was my first time abroad. So we went to Italy. We spent 2 weeks, and we went to Rome. We went to the Tuscany region, and then we went to Florence. And it was eye opening. It was a super big culture shock for me. And the culture shock's a bit addictive. You know what I mean? Like you
Oh
get it
yeah.
once, and that's like kind of what you end up chasing. So but yeah, it was amazing. We were really bad tourists at the time. Like we had like, I think Mariana was wearing like a "Don't Mess with Texas" shirt at one point, and I was wearing like all my Texas Tech gear. So we learned a ton since then, but like, every travel experience is kind of a learning opportunity too.
Yeah, and I really love what you said about like the culture shock being somewhat addictive. I think what I boil it down to is that like it truly makes you stay in the present moment. Like it forces
Right.
that out of you. Um, because you genuinely like if you're not in the present moment, like something bad will happen potentially,
Yeah,
you'll
no,
like
definitely.
you'll like have a cultural blunder, like get pickpocketed. But
Right.
also, it's just all of this newness and you're like a little kid in a candy shop. Um So I love that you said that. And I know you're kind of similar to me in that you're super future looking and prone to kind of um not living in the present moment because you're kind of anxious about what's to come. So does travel help with that? Has it helped with that?
I think so. Yeah. I think anybody who knows me knows I'm super like, type A and very like, I like want to have a plan for every single thing. But, I think a big thing with culture shock, a big thing with international travel is like vulnerability. Like, I think that is like, I would say that's kind of like the underlying feeling that you're feeling whenever you feel culture shock. You're not in control anymore. You're playing in a different playing field than what you're used to playing in. And it's fun, it's you've got to ask strangers for directions. You've got to look like a fool whenever you can't speak but two words of a language and you want a pastry and you don't know how to say it. And like, there's all of these sort of underlying concepts that I feel like are what makes me love travel, like, and I think being vulnerable over this trip has helped me to be chill a little bit. Like, we, right now we're in Poland, and I didn't know a single thing about Poland other than, their dark World War II history. I didn't know anything about it till we came here. And before, I would have been planning a location for 6 months to plan, every single second of the trip. So I think that we've gotten significantly more chill. And I hope once we go back to the US, I can kind of latch on to some of these habits and be a more relaxed person overall.
I love that. Well, talk to us about the process of like unwinding your life in Boston to become nomadic, um, both physically, financially, and then also like mentally, because I think that's probably a big piece of it too.
Yeah. So after my first job, I went to a second job with a tech startup company. And I was kind of hoping that, so like in the back of my mind, I always wanted to travel, right? But I always was kind of hoping that I would get a job that, made me feel kind of like connected and invested and like, made me be like, all right, I'm cool with not traveling because I have like this job that I like. But I didn't really feel that at the tech startup job that I was at. So I think me and Mariana both were kind of, and she's a nurse. For those that don't know, she was working at Mass Gen Hospital. And I think we both kind of were ready for a change. And we had been in Boston at that time for 3 years. I'd been with the new company for a year. And in Boston, we lived pretty far below our means, I would say. We were living in what amounts to a 500 square foot closet in my mind, like it was
It was tiny.
um right, yeah, very very small place. And we wouldn't do too much because we were both working a lot. And so we were able to save up quite a bit of money. And I'm happy to go, we can totally talk more in depth about budget, but just to stay a little bit high level. So Mariana kind of got put through the ringer from COVID being a nurse, and she decided she was going to quit. So she quit. And it was kind of like all the stars aligned, so she quit her job. Our lease was running out in Boston. I wasn't particularly excited about my job. So we sat down. I don't remember the specific moment, but we were like, we should just do it. Like, we should just travel. We are kind of like done with living in Boston, the prices, everything like that. We'll start traveling, and maybe we'll travel 1 month and maybe we'll travel 10 months. We weren't really sure. So,
And for a
uh,
while, sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say for a
no,
while, your goal was to like find a new home base somewhere in the US that you really like felt
I
called to,
forgot
like
about
the
that.
Pacific Northwest. I know you guys were looking at in Colorado. I think maybe you thought that would be the magic pill or, um, yeah, talk to me about that and how you realized like, yeah, no, we're actually just going to like do some international travel instead.
I totally forgot about that actually. Yeah. So we spent we took a trip to Denver actually because we were trying to decide if we wanted to live there. And ultimately we decided that we weren't excited about it. I love Denver as a city, amazing food, amazing, scenery. But to us, it kind of felt like Texas with mountains is the way that we said it. And I just didn't think we were ready to kind of go back to a more car centric life, a more, I think we both decided that like what we were looking for wasn't a new space. We wanted something different. We wanted a change. So that's how we landed on international travel. And whenever you have somebody like you who you've taken super long trips, it just makes it so much more attainable because I kind of had a blueprint of like how it can be done, you know.
Hmm.
So once we made the decision, then it was a logistical battle, right? So, and a mental battle too. But so we packed everything up. We sold everything that we couldn't fit in like a little U box from U-Haul. We had them ship it to Tennessee, which is where our family lives, and all of our stuff sitting in the garage that we could fit, and everything that wasn't got sold. So, and you know, now that I've lived 10 months out of a backpack, you realize how little you really need. So that was another super valuable lesson.
Yeah, at some point you're just like, should I just actually throw the rest of it out? Like,
Yeah,
I don't want
I'm
this
like this,
stuff.
thinking about going home and just like throwing stuff out.
I
I'm very excited
know.
for it.
We'll use that inertia and actually do it for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, no, that's a good debrief. And then talk to me though, like you alluded to like the mental struggles of preparing yourself for a journey like this. Like, did you get a lot of pushback from people in your life? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think our parents are incredibly chill with this sort of stuff. And I think you kind of prime them for it, you know, and so whenever I was doing it, I would say that they were 100% supportive, you know, and I think a lot of the times whenever I told my employer about it, you know, I told them, hey, like I'm gonna be leaving to travel. I think it comes off a little bit almost like not a novelty. Like, oh, really? Like, do you get what I mean by that? Like, very almost
Yeah,
like you
like,
won't do it. I don't know how to explain it, but it just wasn't like I don't feel like they receive it well.
yeah, it's sometimes I feel like people, well, I think part of it stems from like jealousy a little bit potentially, but I
Definitely.
think, yeah, I mean, people may kind of look at you and think like, oh, are you just trying to like find yourself or like, first world problems almost
Right.
in a way. But also jealousy very much comes into play, I'm
Sure.
sure, with your coworkers and employee and bosses. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I would say I had a wide range of people in my life with different emotions on it, but I would say by and large it was excitement. I know Mariana and I were extraordinarily excited, but then closer to the trip, you know, anybody who goes on a long trip, you'll feel nervous. You know, like you'll feel a bit, you know. And I know Kristen, you've done a lot of solo traveling, and that's a whole different beast. But even just like us doing just the two of us for as long as we were planning on doing it, you're nervous. You know, you're used to your creature comforts. You're used to um, you know, the dumb little things, you know, like I was worried about not being able to play video games like ever. Mariana was worried about, you know, running out of her facial lotion that she loves,
Yeah.
and we can't get it in Europe. And it's like all the dumb little stuff culminates to make you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also like the income and financial piece of it too. There's a lot of just uncertainty that you took on in that area. So talk to us about how you financially prepared and structured your finances and saved up.
Yeah, so you know, my background is the same as your background, and if anybody listening doesn't know us, we're both CPAs. So like money is kind of like our careers, money is sort of like what we focus on, and I'm an incredible cheapskate anyway. Not a cheapskate, not a cheapskate. I am
Frugal.
frugal. Yes, that is the better way to say it. So yeah, I mean, whenever we knew that we wanted to plan for the trip, right? We created a budget, and we had a goal, right? We said we're going to have two savings accounts. Okay, we're going to have a savings account that we're willing to travel with. We called that our goals fund, and then we had essentially a nest egg that we didn't want to touch even while we were on the trip. So then whenever we got back from the trip, we would still be financially set. We would just be down our goals fund, and we would still have like this nice big nest egg to use whenever we were ready to go back to the real world. So like I said, the way that we were able to, and I would love, um, you know, on a future chat for us to discuss this more, but like there are a ton of different you know, savings methods and techniques and little tips that can quickly save you money. And that's kind of what we did. You know, we kept expenses low. We weren't buying a lot of material things. We weren't, you know, going out for expensive meals with drinks, and all that sort of stuff just added up over time, and we were able to save a large amount in both our savings fund and our goals fund. And I wanted to make it a point to earn money while we were traveling. I wasn't sure how, but that was always a goal of mine.
Yeah. Yeah. And upon leaving, you had kind of worked it out with your former employer to work like a part-time kind of independent contractor type position. So I'd love to hear like your advice for working out some sort of arrangement with an employer that maybe isn't super willing to. I know your employer was amazing and they were super willing to be flexible, but like what you would recommend for someone that their employer is a little bit more rigid too.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is being in a. I think the only way that what I did works is if you're in a role where you are, in high demand slash like indispensable. So like in my role, I was one of two, at the time that I joined, I was one of two accountants at a, very large, 300 person, very high tech startup company. Right. So like whenever I told them that I was leaving, they were going to be very short staffed. So when I left, I told them, hey, I am giving you a 1 month notice. This will be my final day, but I am totally willing to do some part-time work for you on a contractor basis. And it will have to be on a contractor basis more often than not. You really can't still be a W-2 employee because of tax implications of being abroad. But it was kind of, it's the method I took to this was the worst that anybody can say is no, says is no. And I think
Right.
like that is a rule for life. You know what I mean? Like very easily they could have been like, no, it's okay. We're just gonna, try to, hire your position out. And I've been like, okay, well, thank you. I enjoyed my employment here. But they wanted my help. I wanted to help. And it was like a mutually beneficial situation. So my advice is ask, right? There is no harm in asking. Like as long as you are a hard worker and have shown your loyalty to them, a lot of the times they'll show loyalty to you. So
Yeah.
that's my
And I
that's my
mean, from their perspective, it's so much cheaper to retain a current employee, especially if you know their work ethic and that they're a high achiever, than
right.
to recruit a new employee altogether. So like, yeah, it's in your employer's best incentive to retain you. And especially if you present solutions, like I think you did a really good job of basically saying this is exactly what I want, and it was more of a yes or no question than like, can you guys accommodate me, and making it very open ended. So I
Exactly.
think the more you can just present an offer rather than just like ask an open ended question, the more you'll win in that situation.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, is like having a plan, right? Like don't just be like, hey, can you take me on for part-time work? I was more like, I would like to stay on and I will do these special. Was naming specific special projects that I could work on completely independently, and to just kind of fill the gap before you hire out my position. And I feel like you said, you're almost presenting it to them like a package, like this is what you would pay me. These are the things I could do, take it or leave it. And I even, even within this, and I've never really mentioned this before, but there was a little like negotiation between my employer and I on how much I would be paid to do this job. So like, even once you kind of like lay out a package and you think that they are doing something for you, you still need to command your own career and realize that like you need to figure out what you want your time to be worth. And I wanted my time to be worth a lot because I was going to be traveling. I didn't want to spend time making nothing, while in an awesome new country that I couldn't explore because I'm sitting there working. So that was another kind of piece to the puzzle, and something that anyone considering doing this should think about.
That's really helpful. Yeah. Um, Talk to us about the speed at which you guys travel and what you've been doing versus kind of what your sweet spot is for how long you should stay in a destination.
Yeah, so we've kind of like tried a lot of different speeds during this. I would say, like to give you kind of the range, we've had an overnight stay, or maybe like a 1 or 2 night stay in smaller cities, like Kotor, Montenegro, for example. We just stayed like 1 or 2 nights on our way to Albania. But then we've had long stays, like we stayed 5 weeks in London and we stayed for free, which I would love to get into more later. But we do a wide range, and I would say for us, the sweet spot is for a bigger city a month, and for a smaller city, 2 weeks, I would say is kind of like the range that we like to stay in. But I would say that we've traveled a little bit too fast during this trip because, like, at the beginning, before we met up with you in Prague, we spent 2 total weeks in um in Portugal, and then we spent 2 total weeks in Spain. And like, if you think about, we went to 2 cities in Portugal, we went to 3 cities in Spain. That's fast traveling, and we were tired. We were kind of burnt by the time we got to Spain, or to Czechia, and we realized we can't do this. We can't do this the whole time. So that's whenever we kind of slowed down. So that's a long-winded way of saying, like, for us personally, I think a lot of people in like the digital nomad community would say spend a month minimum, 1 to 3 months. But with the Shenzhen laws the way they are, and all that sort of stuff, I would say for budget purposes, if you really want to be a budget traveler, stay 1 month so you can save a lot of money on like Airbnbs who do monthly discounts.
Yeah. Or
And
if
if
you're
you're more
working
just
full time too, like I would say if you're working full time remotely, those travel days take a lot out of you, and that day is a wash basically. So I
yeah,
would say 1 month would be the right amount of time minimum for someone working full time. Now you've been working part time for the majority, so the 2 weeks can often work too.
right, yeah, for sure.
Cool. Um, awesome. So let's get into your spending while you've been on the road. What is your rough budget every month for the two of you, or per day, however you want to break it down, for us? And then kind of what categories eat up most of your budget?
Yeah, so accommodation, let's start with that. And I would say that probably per day is the easier way for me to think of this, because this is kind of how I would be happy to share with anybody who wants it, kind of like the budget template that I use. But the way that I usually do it is using days, and then kind of like projecting that out to months, and you can project it out a lot further. But I like to get granular whenever I start. So on a per day basis, $50 a night is what we spend on Airbnbs. And I know that we could definitely go cheaper on that, but while being in uncomfortable situations, we wanted to have a little haven. So we generally would, like, even in countries that are a lot cheaper, like Albania, we would get a nicer Airbnb. And then in places like, Barcelona, we might be sharing an Airbnb, or Germany, for example, we might be sharing an Airbnb
Yeah.
with a family, because we like to keep it around $50. And then for food, I would say is another, this wildly varies. There were days we went to Tirana for over 2 weeks in Albania, and we wouldn't spend $10 for the day in food. But then there are places like, trying to think of what a good example. I mean,
Scotland or
Scotland, where we would end up cooking meals in because it was so expensive, and still spending, $30 for food, just on, like, if we got a snack out, or groceries or things like that. So for us, food is, like, I would say top 2 or top 3 reasons why we traveled, to eat the good food.
yeah,
So
you
we
guys are
haven't held
major
back on it.
foodies.
Right. So we haven't held back on it, but we've definitely, like, in London, for example, I could probably count on, one hand the amount of times we ate out in 5 weeks. We would just eat in because their groceries are super good and fresh. But then, right now, the city we were in last was Krakow, and we only cooked one meal in the whole time we were there over 2 weeks. Minus, like, we always eat lunch and / breakfast in, but I'm talking mostly about dinners right now. Yeah, so those are the two big expenses. I mean, there are fixed expenses, right? Like phone and VPN, and those sort of things that are baked in. But those were by far the two biggest categories. And then I would always just allocate maybe, $10 a day to transportation, $10 a day to attractions. And I would say we were around $100 a day for our spend goal.
For two people.
For two people, yeah.
That's fantastic. Great
And
job.
that was in no way struggling at all. That was us kind of balling out sometimes. And
I think it's what I find interesting that you alluded to is you kind of adjust your spend depending on where you are. So even when you're in a super budget friendly destination like Poland, you're probably still going to spend that $100 a day because you'll eat out more and you'll book a nicer Airbnb. So
Right.
what I tell people is like, don't let your budget deter you from going to places that you've always wanted to see in Western Europe, like London or Scotland, because you'll essentially find ways to adjust your quality of life to reflect, what your budget ends up being. And like when we traveled, we went to Albania too, and that ended up being one of our most expensive countries because we were just so excited about how cheap it
Following.
was to eat out that we ate out every meal.
Yeah.
So I think that's cool to recognize. And I think we'll do a whole other interview about house sitting, but I
Yes.
know that's been a major way that you guys have saved money on the road, especially with that accommodation cost. So, the months that you don't have accommodation costs, do you tweak anything else in your budget? Or do you just like put that money in your pocket, back in your pocket, basically?
I would say for us, we put it back in our pocket, So let's use London as an example, and again, we'll get more in depth about it on a different chat. But we spent 5 weeks in London, and we paid zero for accommodation, right? During that time, we also weren't eating out just because I'm like a super value-based traveler. So like for us, we didn't feel like it was worth going out because of just the amount you'd have to pay. So like it was like, are we gonna go pay $30 for two small bowls of pho, or are we just gonna like eat in and eat what we want? And like so I felt like we just put the money back in our pocket. And that was kind of like in a time where I would say we were in like ultimate savings mode, where like we were not trying to spend a ton of money just based on where our budget was at the time. So we put it back in our pocket, and I would suggest everyone do that also, because if you don't, if you save money, you can eventually spend it somewhere else. The $30 I saved not eating out in London per day can be spent here in Poland for a far better meal.
Right, right. And I think that's really cool that you guys recognized that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, and then as far as like on the ground transportation, I know that can be a big cost. How have you guys gotten from point A to point B for the majority of your trip?
So I would say the big thing here, and other people I would say will feel differently, and that's totally fine, is we would always plan ahead long enough where we could get a deal on transportation. So like, if we were traveling city to city and we had no clue what city we were going to immediately after this one, you're going to probably get dinged with a huge, a huge airfare, or the last minute train ticket bookings, which are always more expensive. So for us, we would always book far enough ahead to get the deal. So like we, in terms of how we like to transport ourselves, trains are number one. Trains are something that I will long for once we go back to the US. Like they're efficient, they're, chill, I love them so much. So trains would always be number one. Buses would be number two, because bus stations abroad are not like bus stations in the US. It's very kind of like everybody does it. Versus in the US, it's not that way, and they're not very accessible. And then, our final option would be flying, just because, as many of you may know, like airlines in Europe are not exactly lenient. They're not exactly chill. Like it's, they are gonna weigh your bag, they are gonna measure your bag,
Yeah,
and they're
there's a
gonna
different way you have to pack when you're preparing to get on an airplane versus when you're hopping on a train or a bus. Totally.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So booking early is my number one tip. My number two tip is shop around. There was a lot of times where, we would have liked to take the train, but the bus was 1/10 of the cost. So we ended up taking the bus. And, there's always delays in any transport. So it's almost like no matter what method you take, you're going to get there in the same amount of time, whether it's the
Yeah,
4-hour train ride or the 5-hour bus, it's going to work out the same, for the most part.
so true. Yeah, it's like just allocate a full day.
Right. And these are totally tips for long-term travelers. Like if you are a short-term traveler, like, and you are, this is your 1 week vacation for the year, just get there, like be efficient. Just if it's going to cost more, just do the most efficient thing, because time is money in that regard, versus us, we were
Absolutely.
traveling way slower. It didn't really matter.
You guys at this point like have more time than money, basically, in a
Exactly.
lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Right.
Um, yeah, that's interesting. As far as like Can you talk us through, and I know you've literally been everywhere in Europe, but can you give us a rundown of like where you've been?
Yeah, sure. So, think of a map, okay, and mirror my in your head, mirror me because it's going to be opposite. But we started in Portugal because it was closest to the U.S. We went to Porto and we went to Lisbon. Porto was amazing. Like I will talk about that city for the rest of my life. Gorgeous. Loved Lisbon too. Then we went to Spain, which is your favorite country, but one of our least favorite countries, which is
Yeah.
it's super interesting. I'd love to dig into that more at some point. But we went to Sevilla, we went to Granada, and then we went to Barcelona, which Barcelona was amazing. Then after that, we flew from Barcelona to Prague, where we met up with you. Yeah, Prague was amazing, and I love that whole area over there. So after Prague, we went to Vienna, which Vienna was good but very very expensive. Then we went to Budapest, which is one of my favorite cities ever. Um, After Budapest, we went to Slovenia, which is my sleeper pick for best country ever.
Same.
Yeah, we went to Ljubljana for 2 weeks, I believe. And then we rented a car, which was a phenomenal experience. We went to Lake Bled and we saw like the Julian Alps. We went to like the largest cave, one of the largest caves in Europe, and that was breathtaking. And then after that, we had to get out of the Schengen zone. So that was our 3 months in the Schengen zone. And then from there, we went to Croatia and we spent 1 month in Croatia. We went to Zagreb, we went to Split, and we went to Dubrovnik. Then we went to Montenegro and to Kotor, and that was the 2 day trip that I was telling you about. And then we spent about a month in Albania, and we went to Teth, which was absolutely beautiful, but also like incredibly scary and very like it was a very bootleg experience in a good way. I'd love to talk about that more.
His Teth was like the little mountain village, basically. That's just not well connected to anything, and you have to
Yeah,
take
it
your life
was.
into your own hands to even get up there.
Yes, I was holding my breath almost the whole ride up there, and it was so sketchy, but amazingly beautiful. So after Teth, we spent time in Shkodër, which is like another city in Albania, and then we went to Tirana. And then after Tirana, we went to Istanbul, and we spent 2 weeks in Istanbul, which I got sick in Istanbul. Actually, I got food poisoning, but the food there is unreal, and I will always stand by that, even though it made me sick. Um, and then so from Istanbul, we flew all the way to the UK. So by this point, we still had not been back into Shenzhen. And once we got to the UK, it was about approaching the time we could go back to Shenzhen. So we went to London, where we stayed 5 weeks for free, and then we went to Edinburgh, where we stayed a week. And then I'm going to speed up a little bit because this is starting to take a long time. Then we went to Germany. We spent 2 weeks house sitting in Cologne. We went to Hamburg. We went to Berlin. And then we went down to the Bavaria region and went to Nuremberg and did like some day trips to the cities over there. And then after Nuremberg, we are in our current country, which is Poland. So we went to Krakow. We spent 2 weeks there. And now we are in Wrocław, which is, I just butchered the name, but I don't know how to say it the correct way. But to Americans, Wrocław. And that's where we are now. And then we have one more city after this, back to Prague, where we're going to, and in Wrocław, by the way, it is November 20th. They have one of the best Christmas markets in Europe, and we went last night, and it was unreal. And then
Magic.
Prague also has an amazing one, which we'll get to see next week.
So jealous. That was actually so cool to hear because I guess I haven't connected your entire path in my head. So very efficient. Like you
Right.
basically circled Europe.
Yeah, we did like the fewest flights we could, and I felt like we always were like, what is the most practical country to go to next? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that
Mixing
was kind of
practical though also with desire a bit too. Like I
exactly
feel like the places you didn't want to go to, you didn't go. Like
right. Yeah, and like Edinburgh, for example, we didn't. It wasn't like we could really afford to go there, but it was like, myself and Mariana really wanted to go there, and we had just done 5 weeks free in London, so we were like, we have to go here right now when we can.
that's so cool. Okay, I want to start to wrap up this conversation with kind of a hot round of destinations, best of. So we'll do that. And then I also want to talk about what's next for you long term and career wise. And then we'll wrap up. Sound good?
Cool. Yeah.
Okay. So fire round. Best destination for a budget foodie.
Krakow, easily, with a honorable mention of Berlin. And do you want me to say go into why with both of these?
Where should you go eat or why?
So Berlin, the donors are, me and Mariana would go eat and it would cost us $12 and we would be absolutely stuffed. And
Which
they're
basically it's a
world class.
kebab
In more of a
wrap.
sandwich form. They are unreal. Um, and then Krakow is an international destination for food. I would argue, like, we would get like a really nice bowl of ramen. It would be $6. We would go and get like a huge, really, really nice Neapolitan pizza, and it would be $7. Like, you just are gonna get like super good value everywhere. And it's more familiar foods there versus somewhere like Istanbul is another like world-class food destination, but it's a lot more unknown food, like foods that like you're not 100% sure of, versus Berlin, you're eating currywurst, you're eating donors. Krakow, you're eating whatever you want to eat. So number one, Krakow. Number two, Berlin. Number three, Istanbul, but be ready to like try new things like, lamb intestines.
Love it. Best destination for natural beauty.
Easily Slovenia for me. The Julian Alps were breathtaking. Like, I can't remember the name of the underground cave. I should know it, but it's probably a name I can't pronounce, and just absolutely gorgeous. Like, that whole area is just breathtakingly beauty for natural beauty. Do you have a category about like architectural beauty? Because that is a fully different answer.
Yes.
Okay.
Architectural beauty. Go ahead into
Okay. So
it.
for that, I would say, and Mariana is the big architecture buff, but I think probably Edinburgh. I mean, it's like a fairy tale there. It truthfully is. So like Edinburgh for like the kind of like castle vibes. Prague is like a really good honorable mention there that I'm sure you would agree it's like a fairy tale. And then go see Bavaria. I mean, like like the wood paneled houses, the cobblestone streets, like it is all, gorgeous, just gorgeous.
Best destination for a history lover.
I would probably give that to Berlin because, you have really recent history like the Berlin Wall. And then, there is
World War II.
right, there's a ton of World War II history. There, and not only is there like there's the bunker where Hitler, did the deed there. So like the history is very deep. The history is very like well documented there. And they'll have magnificent museums, magnificent like memorials to like the Jewish people who were killed, and like it's just overall a wonderful destination. And number two, and this might just be recency bias, but I'm gonna give that to Krakow because we were there last week and we went to Auschwitz, and that was one of the most profound things I think I've done in my life. It was unreal. So those two places for me.
Love it. Best destinations for like an interesting cultural experience.
I would say Istanbul. I mean, the if you are from America and you have never been anywhere else, Istanbul will, I think, knock your socks off. It's there's a huge Muslim culture there, right? So you can visit mosques and things that we don't really see in the US. And then there's, a very different food culture, like where in America, our drunk food is like a burger and fries. There they have like a lamb intestine kebab. That is like their good, and it's very good, but it might have been what made me sick. I don't know, but that it's just a very, very different vibe all around. So
It's total East meets West, like half Europe,
totally,
half Asia.
yeah, love
Super
it there.
cool. Best destination for urban vibes. So if you're a city lover.
I would say Budapest. I mean, Budapest is like there. I would say Budapest is one of my favorite locations because of, there's so much to do. And I think that comes with an urban setting. There's, a ton of memorials. There's a ton of good food spots. There's, we went to a jazz club. We went to the thermal baths. Like there is a ton to do.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Best destinations, you can give one for each for a beer, wine, coffee lover.
Beer lover, Prague, easily,
Mm-hmm.
without a doubt. Pilsner Urquell. I'm so excited to go back there and drink an obscene amount of them. And they're cheap too. Like a big, nice Pilsner from like a tank, which is like this, it's more superior than like a keg, is like $2, maybe.
Yeah.
And that was back in, and I know our currency's doing pretty good right now. So that was back in March. So it's definitely that. What were the other two? Coffee and wine.
Wine and coffee. Yeah.
Wine is Portugal, specifically Porto. And Porto, by the way, that was the first city that we went to. It definitely deserved to be in the architectural kind of like category as number, in the top three because it's unkempt, it is authentic. The streets are incredibly like narrow and beautiful. The landscapes are amazing. That highly recommend. I think that's Mariana's number one city that we've been to on the whole trip, and we've been to like 30 cities. But port wine is super good. It's sweeter. So if you don't like wine, you will like port wine, but really strong and super good. And then coffee is an incredibly hard answer. Oh goodness. I think I'll have to go Istanbul, but not Turkish coffee. We stayed in a neighborhood called Katakoy, and it was like the kind of like hip happening neighborhood on the Asia side of the city. And there are because it's such a Muslim culture and they don't drink alcohol, there are coffee shops, three on every single corner, and they're incredibly cheap because Istanbul is cheap, and they're incredibly good, like they do third wave pour overs, they do it all there. So I'm a coffee
Wow.
snob, I would consider myself, and loved Istanbul for coffee.
Well, thanks for letting us travel vicariously through you. That was fun. Um, so to wrap this up, what is next for you guys? I know you're headed back to the US. Are you continuing with travel? Are you guys pursuing like full-time jobs now that you're kind of still in the part-time freelancer mode? Does that look like?
I don't know. You have any suggestions? No, I'm kidding. So
Don't leave. Don't come back
I
to the
know, I
US.
know,
Stay
I
forever.
know. So yeah, we come back December 2nd. I'm super excited. I'll spend the first month with my family, and I'm so excited. I haven't seen them in so long. And then after that, we're gonna take off, and we've got house sits set up. And I think it's gonna be kind of a part two of what we did going to Denver, which we talked about earlier, where we try to figure out where we want to live. So we have house sits set up in Austin, which we don't want to live in Austin. We're just kind of trying to kill some time. And then on our way up, where we eventually want to see, which is the Pacific Northwest, we have a house that's set up in Denver. And then we're going to be spending time like in Portland, Oregon. We're going to be spending time in Seattle, and just kind of like exploring that whole area. And that'll probably be the first half of next year, honestly, just going to work part-time. I'm working on getting something that's a bit more part-time and allows me to still like, go after things I want to do on my own, while not working a full-time job, go after hobbies, passion projects, that sort of things. And then I'm hoping we travel again the second half of 2023. We want to go to South America. We really want to go to Colombia, which is where Mariana's family is from, and we want to go to Mexico, which her family's also from there. And then I would love to go to Asia. That's kind of like my goal. That's kind of far-fetched at this point, but we want to do like Japan, South Korea, and northern Vietnam, like the Hanoi area. So that's the plan right now. That's a super rough plan, but and then after that, I think probably who knows.
Get a home base or
Yeah,
just
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
it depends.
Hopefully we find somewhere that we love during our trip and feel super strongly, but we're going to really miss kind of like the no car culture in Europe and all that sort of stuff. So hoping to continue that in the US.
And just to like put my financial advisor hat on for a moment, I think it's so important to emphasize like Connor and Mariana, like they can continue to travel based on one of them having a part-time income because they've kept their fixed expenses so low. So
Yes.
like that is the point I want you to take away is that like if you want a lifestyle like this, keeping those fixed expenses low to give you the optionality to do basically whatever you want and all of your income to essentially be disposable income to spend is really important and really awesome. Yeah. Well, cool. Thanks, Connor. This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
I definitely think we need to do part 2 to go more into depth about the house sitting piece of it. And also, like, I'm sure people are curious, like, what you guys are doing for insurance right now. Go a little bit more into the finance piece of it, too. So stay tuned for that. And thanks again. Enjoy Poland.
Thank you.